Brilliant. Okay, I'm here with Knut and Margaret, who are at the University of Bergen, which is in Norway, which is all I know about Bergen, and who've been doing research where they've been going to mind, body, spirit type New Age fairs and doing research, and they're going to tell us about it. When you went to these fairs, what kind of people were there who came? Who the audience?
Who the typical visitor is? Maybe Margaret could.
Yeah, the typical visitor is a woman. 8 out of 10 visitors were female, actually, at the fair where we conducted our survey. And she is typically 43 years old. And that's the median age, as well as the average age. And you can elaborate on how these women describe themselves.
Yeah, so we looked into what we call self-designations. That are what the labels sort of people place on themselves. And we asked them about several, like agnostic, mystic, new ager,
Atheist, religious, spiritual, neo-religious, it's a specific Norwegian term. And we found quite strong tendencies in the material.
Yeah, most of them tend to call themselves spiritual. And that was perhaps not so surprising, but now we have the statistics on that.
Yeah, it's confirmed something which we have been assuming really for quite some time, and that I've encountered a lot also in interviewing people within this field.
So that gave you something you kind of suspected already. You thought might be the case, and it turned out it was. Was there anything about the kind of the interviews or the questionnaires you do with people that was surprising?
Yeah,
it wasn't what you expected.
So the next question we had was, who are those who call themselves spiritual? For example, what do they believe? Which beliefs do they agree with?
And we had a list of different alternative belief statements, such as crystals can have magical powers.
We are reborn on Earth after we die.
We accumulate karma as a result of our acts and thoughts.
Yeah, we can communicate through telepathy.
And we can communicate with the deceased, etc., etc.
Yeah. The usual stuff.
You got most of them, I think, read the paper,
And what we found, do you want to drum roll?
Would love to. Yeah, we found that the people who designate themselves as spiritual significantly and to a much stronger degree than others adhere to these beliefs. Actually, each and every one of them, we saw that the spiritual category of attendees, to a much larger extent than the rest, were either very positive or quite positive towards this.
In other words, now we can assume that if a person call themselves spiritual, they will also tend to believe in certain alternative things.
And was it almost all of those, that when people describe themselves as spiritual, they ticked most of those boxes? There were things that they signed up to.
Yeah, there was a tendency that if you adhered quite strongly or very strongly to one of these statements, you would typically tick, very strong or quite strong on the rest of them. So people tended, it's very general, but to either subscribe to such beliefs or to
not.
be negative.
So you didn't get many respondents who ticked very strong for some and not at all for others. You didn't get lots of people who said yes for crystals but no for the dead, and yes for karma but no for...
There were some, of course. We haven't...
but that wasn't the majority view.
But they tend to go hand in hand, these beliefs.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And another interesting thing we did 1 year after this survey was to look into what kind of associations people has to this different self-designation.
So what does it mean? What does spirituality imply? What does religiosity imply? And we found some quite strong tendencies there as well.
Yeah, maybe we should have a footnote here about the Norwegian language and some particulars. If we
Yeah, it was interesting, I think. Well, it's interesting what you said in the paper, so it's worth adding, I think.
So in Norwegian, we have sort of two words for spiritual.
Mm.
The first is spirituell, and as you might suspect, that's quite related to spiritual.
Even I can translate that.
Yeah. But originally that meant something quite different. It meant a very eloquent and vibrant personality.
Kind of spirited, like a spirited speaker. Or,
exactly. Yeah. But now it doesn't so much anymore, because we suspect sometimes in the 60s, with the introduction of New Age, we sort of re-imported the meanings from English.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But we also have another word, namely åndelig.
Underly. I'll pronounce that eventually by the end of the conference. Underly.
And it is related to the German geistlich, if some of you speak German. It is a much broader concept in some ways, but essentially means the same thing. Or does it?
Has,
yeah.
The two have grown to designate the same things, we believe.
Yeah. So what we did was to ask people, what are the first 4 words you think of when you hear this term? And then we will say spirituell, and they will list the 4 words. And we did it for spirituell, åndelig, and religiøs, which is religious, of course. And what people said, firstly, was a bad...
in relation to each of these concepts, spiritual and only, we found that they typically mentioned the other word.
Yeah.
So when we asked them about their associations to spiritual, they said only and vice versa.
Yeah.
Which implies that they have become synonyms.
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah.
But then, if you look into the other words, there are some slight tendencies that åndelig is more abstract. It's about openness, warmth, love, and stuff like that. And spirituell is more technical. It's about crystals, healing, divination.
So underly was more like personal qualities, like openness and love and things, where the others were much more specific.
Yeah.
So spiritual seems to be more about the things that happens in the spheres.
Right.
Yeah. Objects and New Age practices.
And religious is mostly about Christianity. So they said things like priest, church, God, Jesus. One
fire.
Yeah, one said brainwashed. That was kind of interesting. Yeah, stuff like that. So then we got sort of a more richer picture of what lies behind this.
Yeah, I think in kind of English, if you repeat it in English, that you couldn't get the same kind of level of detail in that there's a kind of a gap in the vocabulary.
Perhaps.
Around those terms, or a gap in the way that people use it, that we haven't got a term like underlay that gets to the heart of that.
But you could sort of do the same, just with other words.
Oh, I'm sure you could. Yeah, I'm sure you could pick it out. Yeah, we've heard. I think elsewhere at the comments how so few people now claim they're New Age. I often say other people are New Age, but it doesn't apply to them. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And that ties into our final point, perhaps. The discrepancy between what we are calling people and what they call themselves. Do you want to elaborate on that? Or?
Yeah, we found that the preferred terms in the scholarly discourse, which are neo-religious and New Age, actually only resonated with 1.4 and 6.4 of the respondents. So they are not very, very dominant present in the emic discourses, and this is important that we think about when we go into the field and talk with people, because obviously it can be very estranging if someone comes and uses concepts that you don't identify with, and you can feel a bit that you're put in a category to which you don't really
Yeah, before they even
belong.
started.
So,
You've got hostile or more kind of guarded in your response.
So even though we among ourselves would call these people neo-religious, for example, which is perfectly okay to do, if we go into these fairs and call them when they're neo-religious to their face, so you will get this reaction, negative reaction, and people will start to ask you, why are you here? This is not religion, and stuff like that. So then you have to be a bit careful or mindful, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And that gives a real kind of much more nuanced sense of some of the issues I think about, and the real problems about self-designation and the way that we designate people. And thank you very much for agreeing to let me harass you into being filmed.